Hello and welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. So this week is part 2 of our 2-part series on homework, and we're going to look at purposeful homework this week. So just as a quick recap, because you can go back and watch part 1 if you haven't seen it yet. Last week we discussed, well, the basis of the video was an article by Lisa we saw on the Times Educational Supplement, and it was discussing homework and how homework can be a bit out of date and maybe it isn't relevant, it needs to change. And we talked a lot about what the research shows and our own experiences and our own views. And, you know, in a lot of ways we agreed with Lisa. There were some sweeping statements we didn't totally agree with. But we definitely agreed on one thing, that a lot of homework that's set these days is not purposeful. And if you're going to set homework because you have a policy or, you know, you're required to do it, then you should, as much as possible, make sure that homework is meaningful, purposeful, you know, has impact, and you're not simply setting it in the way you've always set it simply because the school policy says so. So we really unpicked that last week. Of course, what we left with, having made lots of controversial opinions and views, is we didn't actually tell you what we do then, because we do set homework. So that's the basis of today's video: purposeful homework, and how do we do it with the Craig and Dave resources. You know, because we do require you to set homework as if you use our resources, and if you want to get the most out of our resources, we do have an underlying pedagogy behind them. So that's what we're going to unpick a bit today. So let's start, Dave, with, so what do we think? We're really focusing on what we do. What makes the best homework?
Yeah, okay. So I think, or we think, that the best homework should have the following characteristics. Okay. We think it should be short. We don't agree with students spending hours and hours and hours on homework. We think they're entitled to a childhood, and we think there's a lot of learning that can take place just with interactions with the family, doing things with parents and siblings at home, getting involved in extracurricular activities and exercise and other things outside of the home. So we don't think that students should be tethered to the dining table or a desk in their bedroom for hours on end doing homework. We just don't think it's healthy. So it should be short. We also strongly believe that it should require no support, either from siblings or parents or anybody else. It should be something that a child is capable of doing for themselves. And the reason we think that is because it's just unfair to expect parents to be subject specialists.
And we talked about some of the dangers of that. Yeah, sorry, we talked about some of the dangers of that last week, didn't we? That actually, yeah, that's not fair. Sorry, you're on a stride.
Yeah, and to know the methods that you've been teaching at school, you know, and parents won't have a strong awareness of a specification. They won't know where the boundaries of knowledge are. And there's a risk that parents might teach things that are beyond the specification, or perhaps not as deep as the specification. There's all sorts of dangers when you start getting parents and siblings involved. So it should be something a child's capable of doing for themselves. It shouldn't also be dependent on ability. And I know it's common practice now to have differentiated homework, but we've talked in the past about the risks of differentiation and the fact that if you decide to put students in 3 broad categories of low ability, mid ability, and high ability, for want of better terms, then you will find that children don't always naturally fit into those categories, and it's a little bit unfair. And so are you setting homework that is going to be, you know, dependent on their ability? And I think that can be problematic. But of course the opposite of that is, you know, homework that's the same for all learners. We think you should be able to set something that is suitable for everyone. But we also think to give homework a purpose, it should prepare them for the lesson ahead. Now, why do we want to do that? Because we want to get away from the idea that a child turns up to your lesson and says, what are we doing today? What are we learning today? Or God forbid, are we going to have fun today? Or are we going to use the computers today? You know, all those sorts of questions that you get. We want students to know what it is they're learning and why they're learning it and where they're going with it. Okay, so we think homework, rather than being a reflective practice after a lesson, should instead be something they do to prepare them ahead of the lesson, so they know what they're getting into. The other key advantage of that is it's going to give you a lot more time in your lessons, because you're not teaching something for the very first time at the front of the classroom. Students already arrive with a baseline knowledge, so you know what the baseline is that everybody's at before you get into the teaching episode. So we know from the article that we reflected on last week that Lisa and others believe that retrieval practice should be the main purpose of homework. We think it can be a purpose for homework, but we also think there's a very strong there's very strong sort of evidence from our own practice that actually using homework to prepare students for a lesson can be just as effective. We also think that it should give students an opportunity to prepare questions they have for a lesson. I mean, that would be good teaching, wouldn't it? If you're giving students an opportunity to reflect, so they learn something, they think about it, and then they come into a lesson with questions, rather than having to think of those questions on the fly, giving them a little bit of reflection time ahead of the lesson. And finally, we want homework to be something that students are going to be happy to do. And if you tick all the other boxes, then you'll probably tick this box as well. Now, no students really want to do homework, let's face it. But if they have to do homework, let's at least try and make it something that they see the value in. Because I think if they don't see the value of what you're doing, then that's when the reluctance comes in.
Yeah, I think the really big one there is that switch on preparing them for the lesson. I mean, obviously I agree with everything there, and we both do. You know, short, require no support, same for all abilities, and all that. But obviously, if you don't know about Craig and Dave, and one of our unique points at the moment is we do the flipped classroom approach, and we've talked about that a lot. And that is one of the key differences there. You know, the homework is not a consolidation after the fact. It's a preparation before coming to the lesson. And we've done lots of videos on flipped classroom. We have pages of pedagogy on it. But as you say, what we're really getting at there is you now avoid this, what are we learning today, sir? Well, sit down and I'll do a starter and I'll talk to you for 10-15 minutes and I'll let you know, and you'll nod at me politely and I'll think you've all got it. We're changing that on its head, and the benefits of flipped learning are quite, they're quite extraordinary if you get it to work well. And it's worth saying again, we've said that a lot of times before, Dave, this was not the way we've always taught. It was a complete change for us. We taught the way we had been taught at school, the way we were taught to teach, and we flipped our teaching on its head. Now, with the flipped classroom, homework is essential, because one of the things we were saying last week is, well, you didn't actually agree with homework at all, Dave. And I said 95% of people that set homework, it's not a very valid exercise. It doesn't add much. Well, if you're going to prepare students for the lesson, then obviously homework is essential, but we're doing it with a fixed purpose, so they can turn up prepared for the lesson. So yeah, I guess we're going to unpick that a little bit now and how that actually works with our resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to go ahead, Craig, and sort of pull up what we expect students to do when they watch videos that we've got on YouTube? That, by the way, while Craig is doing that, or did you want to say something first?
Well, no, I was just going to lead into that, really. I was going to say, so obviously one of the key things, if you aren't aware of the flipped classroom pedagogy, is before the lesson they need to have some kind of resource to read or digest or watch, or to take in, so that they can do some prior baseline learning before coming to the lesson. Now, there's many ways you can do that. Obviously, you could provide them with a textbook and say, want you to do a spider diagram or take some notes, and we're going to talk about what we do on the following chapter or the following pages. I want you to watch this article. Here at Craig and Dave, what we do is we provide a video. we provide a specific video for every single bullet point of a particular course for GCSE and A-level. So we've broken down, for example, a typical GCSE spec into maybe 98 videos, and at A-level considerably more, about 150. So what we will be saying is, before this lesson, we want you to watch the following 8-minute video, and we want you to watch the video and take some notes. Now, we're going to underpin how to take those notes because that's an important bit. And I know we're going to get there, but let me just show you. This is an extract from one of our GCSE videos. Now, obviously, I'm not actually going to play the video. This is the PowerPoint the video was based on. There's obviously a narration through this, and there's some animations. But the important thing here is at GCSE level, we have this take notes icon. So that's the point in the video where we're telling the student to pause the video and take down notes of what's on the screen. And we do that because we believe at GCSE, don't forget, when they start GCSE, they're only, what, 14? And if it's a 3-year GCSE, possibly even 13, a lot of schools still do that model. And we don't believe at that age that students have the skill sufficiently yet to take detailed notes. And they're in danger, if you say watch this video and take notes, of trying to write down everything that's on the screen and not just sitting down and digesting it. So we'll look at A-level in a bit, but say, yeah, GCSE, we actually have a take notes icon. So the students know, right, I've watched 7 minutes. I'm going to pause the video now, and I've got a summary of information which I should be taking in and bringing to my lesson. Did you want to add anything, Con, about that? I'm trying not to veer into the method of note taking because I know we're going to come on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. We won't go into that right now, but it's probably worth mentioning that we're taking students on a journey in the sense that we know in year 7, 8, and 9, they won't have had to take notes. They don't need to take notes. However, when they get to university or they get into the world of work and they go to training sessions and whatever it might be, there might be a need to take notes. So when are they learning how to take notes exactly? Are they learning how to take notes when they get to university? Well, it's a bit late by then, or when they get out into the world of work and they go to a meeting for the first time. It's too late. So we think that students have to be on the learning journey with a note-taking process as well. So we show them what succinct notes look like at GCSE with, as you say, with this little take notes icon, which is the blue paper and the blue sort of pencil icon in the top left hand corner that you can see. And we train the students so that when they see that icon, they can pause the video and write down the notes, which just summarize everything that's come before. So they start to appreciate what good notes kind of look like, okay, without actually having to do it for themselves, because they're just copying off the video. Now, before we get into A-level, Craig, I have to say there are going to be lots of teachers out there that are going to shudder in horror when we say copy off the video. And they'll shudder in horror because classic pedagogy says you don't get students to copy off the board. A, because it wastes a lot of time in your lesson, true. B, because some will have literacy issues and it will be problematic for them, true. And C, it doesn't really add a lot of value to the learning. Okay, so let's just take those head on, shall we? Because we reflected on all that and said, actually, do you know what? There is some value in this. And the value is partly preparing them for the real world that I've just discussed. But, you know, the first criticism is that you shouldn't get students to take notes off the board because they're constantly looking down, looking up, looking down, looking up, and it's going to waste a lot of time. Well, they're doing this for homework. Yeah. So that's okay. It's not wasting any of your lesson time. Okay. It's not taking the pace out of your lesson at all. The second criticism is, you know, it's disadvantageous for those learners that can't write very well. Well, that's okay, because you could provide these. We provide all these PowerPoints, by the way, to the teachers in PowerPoint format. If you've got learners that you know are going to find this very, very difficult, then you can make the task a little easier. You can say to them, look, when you get to the take notes icon, I want you to note down the bullet points, but I will give you the other text. You don't need to write that. When we get into the lesson, you can cue the video up, or I'll provide you with the PowerPoint, and we can pause the video at that point, or you can go to that slide in the PowerPoint and you can use the notes direct from the video. Okay, so you don't need them to write it down if that's going to be a literacy barrier. However, if it's not going to be a literacy barrier, it's good for them, because not only are they writing, which often we don't do a lot of handwriting now, and we know that, you know, that's a good skill in itself. But what you're doing is you're getting students to reflect on what they're learning ahead of the lesson, so that when they come into the lesson, they're not seeing it for the very first time. Yeah. It's already gone through their eyes, through their body, and out of their hands. Okay. So when they get into lesson and they start reading these notes so that they can use them for activities, to help them with activities, guess what? It goes through their eyes, through their brains, out of their hands again. And so that repetition and that sort of sequencing of reading something, taking it in, writing, reading, taking it in, writing, and going through that cycle actually has quite a lot of benefits. So we understand the criticisms that people would have of this technique, but it's surprisingly effective when you use notes in an effective way. And we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, indeed, we're not literally just asking them to write the notes and that's it. And we're going to get on to an enhanced way of making note taking more useful that's backed up with pedagogy. So that's a GCSE video, but the same at A level. You know, we asked them to watch a video before the lesson, and again, we asked them to take some notes. So if I just bring up an example here of a A-level one. There you go. So this is one of our A-level videos from the OCR specification. Now you'll notice here that there is no notes icon in this, and that's quite deliberate. What you do have on the right-hand side here, and as I say, this is actually in a video with narration and sort of animated slides and everything, but what note on the right-hand side is this consistent panel that's effectively a set of bullet points that's going over the narration of the video. So there you go. That was a little video there on RAM and ROM. Now, we actually have had people email in saying, where's the take notes icon in A level? Can you please add them in? But of course, we're being a bit more deliberate now. As Dave said, this idea of taking them on a journey. When they get to university, the lecturer's not going to say, we're just going to pause there for 5 minutes. The take note icon's on the screen. I'm going to drink my coffee. You've got 3 minutes to write that down. You know, you're not told. So we made a conscious decision to have this panel on the right-hand side where we would summarize the information we're saying. But hopefully, if you've been doing this for 2 years, you should now be quite good at going, right, okay, well, I'm going to sit back and watch the video first. Then I'm going to go through and go, yeah, there's some fundamental bits. And I've got my text on the screen. I'm aiding with literacy there as well. We're not simply narrating it in a voice. The words are on the screen. But again, it's removing the scaffolding slightly, expecting a little more now from the A-level students. But in essence, the process is still the same. Watch a video before the lesson and take some notes.
Yeah, exactly. And when students come into the lesson and they say, oh, I wrote 8 pages of notes, then it's an opportunity to say, well, you're probably capturing more than the essential information. You're probably in danger of writing everything that you see rather than taking in what you're being taught and then going back through it again and thinking, well, what were the most important parts of this? And then just writing the notes on the most important parts, which is what we were trying to train you to do at GCSE. So yeah, some of our A-level students still try and copy everything off the slides, and we have to try and wean them off that. And others don't write enough. But you know what? That's a learning point. So in the lesson, you can talk about, well, you know, what was important in this video? What did you learn from this video? And that's a far better starting place than just teaching them from the front. You know, you can say, what questions have you got as a result of watching that video? And quite often the questions that the students will have will be misconceptions that you can sort of pick up and discuss, and you've just accelerated that learning process, as well as giving them something that is a solid foundation for them to complete activities without needing your help in the lesson. So you can have self-starting lessons and activities, but also you're preparing them for later in life when note-taking is a very valuable skill. And you can do this electronically. We know a lot of schools use OneNote and Google Classroom and things like that, and they get the students to sort of type the notes or copy and paste them. I mean, that's okay. I mean, we think there's, you know, quite a lot of value in getting students to go more slowly and take in what they're doing, and handwriting kind of does that better than just a copy and paste exercise. But hey, you know, it doesn't really matter as long as they're being prepared for the lesson and they're learning what effective notes look like. So I'll just share then an example of a piece of student work. So I appreciate this is a little bit small.
I guess this takes us really, as you say, on to the next thing, which is what are effective notes? And this is what we've been alluding to. You'll notice already, and I know Dave's going to talk about this, so I've interrupted. You'll notice already, it isn't simply a lined exercise book, you know, a lined exercise. Off you go, write some notes. There's a certain structure to these notes. Sorry, Dave, go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say to the students, start a new video on a new page so that it's very easy for you as a teacher to see where the notes for a particular video start and stop, for example. But yeah, we'll have a look at this in a cleaner format in a moment. But in essence, you've got the title of the video at the top, but now that could have been a page in a textbook, as Craig said. You know, you could get them to read paragraphs from a textbook if you want to do it that way. You don't have to do it with video. By the way, when what I was going to say earlier, and then Craig stopped me and moved on, was that all our videos are completely free on YouTube. We only use YouTube because the chance of it going down is very, very slim because it's backed up by Google. That's really the only reason we're using YouTube. And they're completely advertisement free as well. There's no monetization. We don't really believe in monetizing student content. So they're completely free, completely ad free. But if you don't want to use videos, maybe there's a technology barrier because students don't have access to the technology they need. Although I would argue most have now got smartphones on the 4G network. But you know, putting that to one side, you can certainly do this with textbooks or classroom materials that you've prepared, you know, that you print out and you give them. There's lots of ways of giving them material to do this from. Anyway, so you've got that, and then you've got the topic. There might be a due date when your lesson is, and then we've got the notes, and those are an exact copy of what was in the take notes slide for GCSE, and obviously it's a summary that the student has chosen for A level. And so they really get a feel for what's going to be important in this lesson. In this lesson, clearly I'm going to be learning about client-server models, the advantages and the disadvantages of that, and peer-to-peer models and the advantages and disadvantages of that. So you're able to start your lesson with, so what did we learn from the video, Jack? I learned
straight in
client-server and peer-to-peer models. Okay. Craig, you were going to say something.
No, I just like you went, Jack, what did we learn from the video? And I just went, boom, straight in. And that is one of the benefits of flipped classroom. It literally, you know, you have that conversation immediately. I know we're going to get into stuff like what happens if they don't watch the video and stuff, but you'll find that, you know, this is great. Students like being confident when they answer questions. And if they know the lesson is based on the video and they haven't watched it, they feel very silly very quickly and then become to know, actually, I feel better about myself if I've watched this video and come in. It's that self-starting immediately with the topic and therefore generating extra lesson time out of nowhere. I'll be careful not to go down on the whole benefits of flipped classroom because it's not what this video is really about, but yeah,
absolutely. I mean, students want to feel confident. Okay, when you ask them a question and you don't expect them to know the answer, then they immediately get that adrenaline flash, and then they're not very happy at looking silly in front of their peers. But you know, if you ask them what's the advantage of a client-server model, you expect them to know the answer before you've taught them anything because they did that for homework. And there's nothing wrong with them saying, hang on a second, let me just refer to my notes. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. But it enables you to start that lesson without a teaching episode, which we think is really advantageous. It also means that you've got an opportunity to ask deeper questions earlier in the lesson. Okay, so talking about outstanding lessons, it would be far better to ask, why would you choose to use a client-server model instead of a peer-to-peer model? And that's a much deeper question than just, what's the advantage of client server, for example. You could say Fortnite is using servers to enable a multiplayer experience. Do you think that's peer-to-peer or client server? What evidence have you got that Fortnite might be using one or the other? And you can get those sort of rich conversations that are centered on the student experience and what they know in the real world, which is much easier to get to more quickly than standing at the front and talking to them for 20 minutes about client server and talking to them for another 20 minutes about peer-to-peer and here are the advantages and here are the disadvantages and I fill in this worksheet. So this is about enabling those deeper conversations that really help to embed learning and make them think. So talking about making them think, what's really important is the bit that's harder to see on here. And we'll have a look, as I say, at a cleaner look at this in a minute. But on the left-hand panel here is a column that says questions. Now, what the student is supposed to do is take the basic notes and then turn that into a question. Okay. And having done that for the entire video, there might be additional questions that they've got in their mind that they're not very clear about, that they want to pose in the lesson when the lesson comes. So they don't forget what those questions are or those misunderstandings might be. They can write their own questions in here as well to give them prompts to ask their teacher when they get to the lesson. So that's a really critical part of this process. It's not just copying, which is one of the big criticisms. It's about reflection and saying, okay, well, what would be, if these are the notes, then what's the question? What's the big idea here? And then at the bottom of the page, you've then got the terms. So what were the critical terms that I had to understand from this, up to a maximum of 8? Okay. And then you can use these terms with the students and you can say, so what's the role of a server in a client server model? And you're starting from that accelerated point. Now, before we look at a slightly cleaner, it's easier to look at a cleaner version. So have you got something to add to that while I just flick my slide?
No, I mean, the one thing we haven't done here is obviously talk about the fact that this note-taking model that we've shown actually has a particular name. I didn't know if you wanted to get onto it yet or not. So what we're referring to here is the Cornell note-taking method. And we know many of you may be aware of it, but it's one of the things that Dave mentioned very early on was the criticism that some teachers might have of simply taking notes. Pause the video, there's a notes icon, copy it down. As we said, we're not disrupting your lesson because you're doing it as homework before the lesson. You're doing it with a purpose to prepare you for the lesson, to allow for an accelerated start, deeper questions earlier. But at the same time, we're not just saying take notes. We're using this Cornell note-taking method, which Dave's just shown you in principle there. Well researched, well understood. We've got information about it on our website, and I think we've probably talked about it before. We actually sell Cornell note books, which you can buy, that has all this formatting. You don't need to buy them though. I mean, it's lovely if you do, and many schools do, but you can just get an exercise book and they can put rulers in it. But this further, and again, if you remember from last week, talking about the effective research, talking about the effective homework and what the research said, and how the effective homework gets better at GCSE and A level, and better with a focus and a purpose. It gets better still when you use Cornell note-taking as your method of capturing learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to sort of double down on that then. So this is what the Cornell approach looks like. And it comes from Cornell University, by the way. If you're wondering who's Cornell, it's Cornell University. Okay, so what you've got, here's the structure. So we talked about having the video title. We talked about having the topic and the due date, if that's important. And then the notes that you're taking from the video, and then turning those into questions. Okay, so as an example, it says the Cornell note-taking system is a fast method of writing notes. So to turn that into a question, it would be, what is the Cornell method, for example? So that's what you want the students to do, is to turn what they've written into questions, because that means they're not just blindly copying. They have to reflect on it.
It's that extra cognitive process, isn't it? I'm watching the video and absorbing your knowledge. I'm writing down the summary. I'm making sure I've read the summary, that I've written down and understand it enough that I can rephrase that in a question. It's all those extra cognitive steps. And then all of that comes to the lesson with them being more prepared and being able to start instantly.
Yeah, that's right. And then you've got the key terms, as we were talking about a moment ago. So from this, and those aren't in the video. So again, the students have to reflect on, okay, so these are all the notes that I've got. These are the questions. So what are the key words that consistently come out of the notes and the questions? And of course, in this example, it would be probably the word Cornell and notes. In addition to that, you've then got a little marking grid. Now, we'll talk a little bit about marking. So Craig and I hate marking. I hate marking more than Craig. In fact, I'd rather do no marking, truth be known. And we've talked in the past about marking and what's effective marking and all the rest of it. And no doubt we'll talk about that again in the future. But for now, I would suggest you don't mark this. Okay, don't give yourself more marking than you need. If you're a teacher watching this, you don't need to mark the notes. The notes are for the student so that they're prepared ahead of the lesson, so that when they start doing activities, they can refer to these notes to help them do the activities. They're not for you, they're for the student. Okay, Absolutely. So they don't need marking in the traditional sense. Having said that, you probably want to know whether they're actually doing the work or not, and encouraging best practice. So one thing that you do, Craig, is when you start your lessons, you say to the students as they come into the room, put your book on the desk. If what they're going to do doesn't require their notes, okay, maybe they've got some activities to start with that don't require the notes they've got in their book, you say to them, come in, put your book on the desk, and it just kind of instills that discipline, that expectation that, oh, he is actually going to check this.
That sense of fear.
And then you're able to have that immediate conversation with that child that can't put the book on the desk because they haven't brought it in or they haven't done the work and they're trying to get away with it. So it gives you that immediate point of contact, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, 100%, and instill that sense of fear into them as well, which of course is really important as a teacher. No, absolutely. I mean, obviously they need their notes a lot of the time to self-start, but one thing we do, and I won't diverge now, is we typically tend to start a lesson by doing sort of 5-10 minutes of smart revise, so they will know, come in, pop your Cornell notebook on my desk, please. You can crack straight on with smart revise, and it's not a long process. As Dave says, I'm not marking it. It really is just a 20-second, not even that, a 5-10 second glance for each student, turn around and go, yep, they had 3 videos to watch for homework. I like it. It's good. There's detail. I can see it. Next. And that's it. And what it instantly highlights, as you say, is that student's like, I haven't got your book, Jack, for example. I haven't got your book, Jack. Oh, well, did you watch the videos? Yeah. Did you? And it allows that conversation straight away, and just knows that you have those expectations. But completely agree with Dave. I'm not marking these. They're not for me. Now, we do marking. We mark the assessment that's the end product of this work. But these notes, I think that was a great statement. These notes are for them, to prepare them from the lesson and to support them when carrying out the activities and tasks of that lesson. So although I may look at them and say and question them on their notes, I'm certainly not collecting these in and marking them.
No. So a few quick tips for teachers then. So what you can do, you don't have to do it as they come in the room, get them to put the books on the desk. That's certainly one way, and it works very well in certain situations. But if they need the books to complete the activities, then get into the habit of, when they come into the classroom, the first thing they do is get their book out and they turn it to the page where they wrote their notes. Get them in the habit of doing that. So every lesson, that's what they do. Okay. Come in, open the book, and then what you can do, and by the way, do that if they're going to put it on your desk as well. Get them to open it to the right page so you don't have to fiddle around with the pages. Okay, so then you can go around the classroom while they're working, because they don't need you to do that 20-minute teacher talk at the front. So as they start with that first activity or bit of smart revise, go round, have a look, and all you're doing is quickly assessing, did they do the work or not? Okay, and if they did, then you can say it's either partially completed or completed, or if it's got a high standard of presentation, then you can tick that box. And if they didn't do it, then you can tick the 2 complete box, which, it's not a negative statement, is it? But then it allows you later to reflect on that, because you can quickly flick through the pages of their book when it comes to an assessment point to work out, well, where are the majority of the ticks that I put in over the last term, and if you're ticking a lot of 2 complete boxes, then they're obviously not really doing their homework as often as they should. So a couple of quick tips there. And as I said earlier, get them to do a new video on a new page, so that there's no ambiguity about sort of which box you're ticking, and where a video starts and where a video ends. And it makes it easier for them when they reflect on these later, perhaps for revision or something, to have a new video on every page. So that would be my advice with using these. Right. Okay, so that's the Craig and Dave approach to homework then, Craig.
Yeah,
there's a big elephant in the room, though, which we kind of alluded to.
Oh, okay.
And you did mention earlier, but perhaps we should just, discuss that a little bit more as well, which is this. Yeah, but what if the students don't do the homework? Okay, so perhaps the biggest criticism of a flipped classroom approach and preparing the students ahead of the lesson is that they say, well, of course, if you are encouraging them to do all that extracurricular activity and have time with the family and a bit of baking in the evening and all these other things, then maybe they don't have time to do their homework. Maybe life gets in the way. Something happens. Crises happen in families. We understand that, and they can't do the homework, or perhaps they just choose not to do the homework. Is the other thing. So I would just put a couple of pointers out there, and I'm sure you've got something to add, Craig. Firstly, you need to establish at the beginning of the year whether you do actually have a technological barrier or not. Now, don't forget, students are going to invent problems if it means that they can avoid the work. So you want to establish fairly early on, without telling them how you're going to get them to do their homework, whether they have access, who can watch YouTube at home? Could you just put your hand up, please, if you can watch YouTube at home? Right, and then the students that don't put their hand up, then clearly there's something there that you need to kind of work out whether there's a technological barrier or not. But the chances are most of your students are going to be able to watch YouTube at home. Okay, and so there's no excuse, because they can do it on the smartphone, they can do it on a tablet, they can do it on a computer or a shared computer in their family, whatever they've got. As long as there's no technological barrier, then there's no excuse for them not to do the work, right? Now, on those, so you need to just establish that as your expectation, and don't allow them to not do it. Use your normal school procedures if they don't do the homework. Okay, just have those high expectations and high standards. And as soon as the students realize that you're serious about this, and actually the homework's pretty easy because it's not very demanding, then they will actually do it. Okay. But of course, occasionally life gets in the way and they can't do it. Well, that's all right. Okay. Although this is intended to accelerate the learning process, there are times where it can't. And there's nothing wrong with a student using their friend's notebook to help them, because they've written the same notes that they would have written if they'd have had the time to do it. So get them to use a friend's book, work in pairs. There's no big deal with that. Or if you want to, you can tell the student, if it's appropriate and you can do it in the lesson, put some headphones on, make that a piece of equipment that they require for your lessons, their own set of headphones that they bring in. Put your headphones in. I want you to watch the video for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the lesson, because all our videos are between 5 and 10 minutes long. We'll maybe talk briefly about that in a minute. And there's no harm in them watching the video in the lesson. You don't need them to make the notes. They can just pause the video when they get to the take notes icon or the relevant part of the video at A level, in order for them to do the activity. Okay, so it's just about accelerating the learning process. So I wouldn't make a big deal of the fact that, oh, what if they don't do the homework? Well, as a teacher, you're inventing barriers that don't really exist, dare I say. Craig?
Yeah. Well, no, and just like a lot of people think, well, oh, but what if they don't do the homework? Well, if this is a student who isn't doing the homework, they probably weren't doing the homework before. Well, what were you doing then to solve that problem? The difference is the student, dare I say it, feels sillier now, because once you establish that consistency and expectation, they start. And as Dave said earlier, no one likes the right. I've talked to you for 20 minutes, so I'm going to fire some questions out, and you instantly shy away because as a student, you don't want to be picked on because you weren't listening. Whereas now you turn up to the lesson, it's like, right, we're getting on with activity number 1, and I've got a few questions. So Sam, what do you think the difference between RAM and ROM is? And all of a sudden, that ability not to be able to even access the lesson because your lesson is shifted. It's not, what we're going to learn today, right? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen to you, kind of. It's now, no, when I turn up, if I haven't watched the videos, I'm completely out of my depth because within seconds, everyone else is cracking on. Everyone else is learning, and I stand out. And you'd be surprised. It's consistency, it's expectations, and if you do that, you will find that students get on board because, as we said, it's not the hardest of homeworks, and it does require not a lot of time. It does require no parental support, and all those things we looked at the very start. It is watch video and take notes. So really, it is about those, expectations, consistency, and there are ways around it, as Dave said as well. Well, you watch the video for 5-10 minutes at the start of the lesson. What that doesn't do is stop everyone else in the class getting on with the lesson, doesn't stop you going around the class and speaking to those students who had a few questions on the video. So, even those 1 or 2 students that haven't watched it, it doesn't stop your lesson from being self-starting, from you getting involved and having an impact immediately. And we still have it. Yeah, we have it. We're not perfect. We still have students. Like, I didn't watch them today. And they'll get the look. They'll get the Craig look, and they'll know not to do it again. But, it is just about those expectations, I think, and being consistent and being firm.
I think you said something really interesting a moment ago, which is, if they didn't do their homework before, then they're probably not doing their homework now. And this is the misconception that suddenly, by changing homework, that all of a sudden they all do it. It's not a magic wand, okay? No. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it solves some of the problems, and that's the point. So don't be looking for the magic solution. It doesn't exist. Okay?
And because the lesson is entirely dependent on having watched the homework, what you'll probably find is a lot more of your students are doing the homework and are doing it, and because they realize they're doing it for a purpose, that the lesson is based on it, and without it they'll find it very difficult to access the lesson. So less of this, they won't, what if they don't do the homework, to like, actually, I've given it a go, I've been firm, I've been consistent, I've been fair, and what I found is, wow, actually most of the students aren't doing most of the homework most of the time. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll probably be less frustrated as a teacher.
Yeah, and just the final comments from me. Isn't it lovely then when someone comes into your lesson and students are confident, they're articulate, they can answer deeper questions, they're more involved in the lesson, and the observer goes round and they see the quality of notes that the students got. They don't know that they copied those off a video. They think the students are somehow amazing at writing notes and preparing for the lesson, and it looks amazing. But anyway, it's not about looking good. It's about making sure that we accelerate the learning process and students get something valuable out of it. So the very, very last thing is that we started the video by saying that homework should have certain characteristics. And this method meets all of those characteristics. And it is short. And the videos are, the whole Cornell and flipped learning pedagogy says that the video shouldn't really be more than 12 minutes long, because if it's more than 12 minutes long, the students will switch off. It will turn it into a long homework. So we make sure that all our videos are between 4 and 12 minutes long. Now, does it mean that you're going to find the odd video that's slightly longer than 12 minutes? Probably. We're not perfect, but we've tried to make them between 4 and 12 minutes long as a maximum, so that we're only focusing on the important things that the students need to learn, and it cuts out all the waffle and irrelevant stuff that students are going to remember that was not important at the expense of the things that were important. So it's quite a good experience for us, actually, to say, can we teach this concept in under 12 minutes? Because if we can, we're probably doing a good job. And if we can't, it's probably too complicated, and we need to think about how we can break that down. So 4 to 12 minutes long, the videos, all as you'd expect from Craig and Dave, all built on sound pedagogy.
Marvelous. Well, I'll just pop up one more time the link. So obviously everything we've talked about today, our flipped classroom pedagogy, link to articles on the Cornell note taking, a free template for you to download, and more is all off at our website. So feel free to go away and have a look. And again, I say if you haven't watched last week's video, it's a nice bit of scene setting about the research of homework. So feel free to go away and watch that. Right, well, thank you very much, everyone. It's been an excellent couple of episodes, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.